This week marks the season finale of Loki, and it's going to be a big one. Reports have come out that this season finale is going to cement Kang as being the next big villain for the next two Avengers movies. But we've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to give our theories here on what's going to happen at the Loki finale. I'm joined by Mike from Laughing Stock Cinema and Media, and this is our second time recording this. Thank you, Mike, for being here again. The first time we recorded it, it was a good discussion, but it went long, but it was still good. But I accidentally deleted it off my computer. This is take two. So what we're going to be talking about is we're going to give our theories about what's going to happen in Loki in the finale. We do know that, and it's been confirmed that from a couple weeks ago, Marvel revealed a guidebook or released a guidebook that reveals that Loki season 2 and season 1 take place before Ant-Man and Quantumania. So that means that the Council of Kangs may actually be established in this Loki finale. But we also know that now that Loki can jump through time at will, we might see the return of Victor Timely. He won't be spaghettified, and that could mean that he ends up being one of the primary reasons as to why Kang comes back into power. So, first of all, I want to ask you, what do you think about, like, where do you think this is going? What do you think is going to happen in the finale?
Yeah, so as we talked about in the previous version, which is kind of
That
funny that
nobody
we're
will see.
redoing it. It's kind of funny that we're redoing it because, in a sense, it seems like Loki's gaining the power to do that himself in his show. So the thing is, with regard to that, I don't really know because the show has experimented with so many different time travel theories in one show. You know, you have bootstrap paradox, causality loops, you have like multiple timelines, the many worlds multiverse theory, you have like quantum mechanics, you have so much going on with like hyper time with the TVA and then the lower timeline. So it's really interesting, but now we have it where Loki seems, at least from what I've experienced by watching the show, I'll have to rewatch everything before the finale again, but it seems like Loki is basically reverting himself back to his previous bodies that existed within the prior timeline of wherever he was at the time. And so as a result, it's almost like another time travel theory where when you go back in time, kind of like in Days of Future
Right.
Past, we saw Wolverine could only go back to where his body already was. And thus, in turn, maybe that's kind of what's happening with Loki. And if so, then maybe he has the chance of, let's say, breaking the loop by being able to make changes in there. And that's the thing, too. One of the major things that comes down to the loop, and that I want to discuss for sure, has to do with Kang and He Who Remains and Victor Timely. Because I was under the impression when they first brought in Victor Timely, he was going to be He Who Remains. Because even though they've tried to say, "Oh, you're not him, you'll never be him,"
Yeah, Miss Minutes said that.
Miss Minutes, yeah. And so, with regard to that, it makes you think he isn't, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that happens with him that he basically seems to have created the TVA, the guidebook with Ouroboros and
The
stuff.
time
And
loop.
we
There's a
know,
time loop there.
yeah. So it makes me wonder if Kang is behind everything, even including the actions of some of the other characters who think that they're doing their own thing. And in turn, he is creating himself and then also creating the time loop where he will, as he said to Loki in his 15-minute monologue, basically, you kill me, it's going to loop again, and I
I'll
win
end up right
again.
back here in the
Yeah.
first place. That's what he said. Yeah. But it's cool because, yeah, a lot of theories have been going around this week about what you just said. A lot of
Mm.
folks think that Victor Timely is going to end up being He Who Remains with time. Now, like I've said before, when it comes to studying this show, you have to be careful when it comes to time because the casual audience of Marvel is probably not going to be able to wrap their heads around like how this time theory actually works. Because Victor, if you're wondering how can Victor Timely become He Who Remains if he died already, with time travel and alternate dimensions and branching timelines, you could easily have a branch that goes out and creates another Kang, and then that Kang has technology to travel back to the main branch. Because we know from Ant-Man, he's got a
Mm.
ship that can go to any timeline, any point. So if you've already have complete knowledge of all these different timelines, the big theories are that either Kang from Ant-Man it becomes He Who Remains, or Victor Timely becomes He Who Remains, like little by little. Obviously, when
Yeah.
you look at Victor Timely, he doesn't behave like He Who Remains, but again, you have to think about this fourth dimensionally. He who remains is years and years and years later. It could be a situation
Oh
where
yeah.
they are the same guy, but we don't see the passage of time because there's two different ways to look at this. There's the timeline and there's that individual's passage of time, like Einstein's theory of relativity. If you go out into space at light speed, you might have a ship that goes light speed. It'll take you 1 minute to go 1 light year away, and when you get back, everyone's already dead. Your grandchildren might be
Yeah.
alive. To you, it's only a minute. You don't even age. Meanwhile, the whole world is aged, and that's kind of the theory of relativity. You have to remember that with these shows is that essentially Kang's whole thing is that he's making himself immortal. You can kill him all
Hmm.
you want to, but he'll always come back. Now,
Yeah.
if you want to get into the specifics of whether or not it's the same soul, that's a different argument. But
Mm.
one of the big theories, Mike, is that because he said it in season one, that everything that's happened in season two has been part of Kang's plan, including Loki and Sylvie, including, and we know for a fact, going back in time to give Victor Timely the Ouroboros manual. That was part of his
Yeah.
contingency plan, including even the TVA shutting down and rebooting. It feels like all of this, people have theorized
Yeah.
that all of this is part of the plan, like the architect in the second Matrix movie. What do you think
Hmm.
about that possibility?
That's what that scene is very reminiscent of, and it took a long time for people because so many people like shit on The Matrix Reloaded, even though I think it's a really good movie. And so many people they see that scene, for example. I mean, the rave scene's a little ridiculous, but so many people see that one scene with the architect and they don't understand what he's even saying. But when you rewatch and think about it, you're like, oh, everything he just said makes
It's a
sense.
great
Like
twist.
yeah, and so that's what's happening with Kang. And the thing that's really interesting too is that you mentioned Einstein. It seems like the premise of a lot of what we're seeing is based upon this kind of theory people used to have when they came up with the bootstrap paradox, which is what if you took the theory of relativity, went back in time, and gave it to Einstein, and he learned it from that, and then he published it? Like, where is the information originally coming from? And the same thing with the book. The book was given to young Victor Timely, who then basically created it with his manual, and then Ouroboros like kind of wrote it and based everything he learned off of that, and thus the book went back to him in an infinite bootstrap paradox loop. And so the thing is like I definitely understand where you're coming from, where the casual audience might be lost on this. They're going to have to do a really big explanation like they did at the end of the last season. Because the fact is that, you know, I've seen like Primer and Dark, and I've read books about time travel. I love time travel. So I can get it like any day of the week. But I could see why some people are like, this is overly convoluted and ridiculous, and they're not going to like it. But so far for me, all the experimenting with time travel is really good. It reminds me of a show from the British Broadcasting Channel. You know, we all know the analogy, the letters for that. And so basically, you know, I really like it's kind of like Doctor Who in a sense too. And I think you mentioned in our last
What's the name of the
video,
show? Do you remember the name of the show?
well, there's like Doctor Who, for example, is one of the big time travel
That's
ones from
true.
there. Sherlock, you know, it reminds me a little bit of that times too. It kind of has that style to it that a lot of those shows do. And, you know, I kind of expect Loki to go into a phone booth the next episode or you know, kind of like Bill and Ted too, a little bit. But like you said in the last time we recorded, you think that there's a chance that Loki might eventually somehow become like the god of time, right?
Avenger Prime. I think he might. I think he might actually take over He Who Remains spot. I'm not saying it's gonna
Yeah.
happen in the episode 6 of season 2. I'm saying when all is said and done, because the rumor for a while has been that they're going to at some point reboot the MCU for Phase 7, do a soft reboot, and that all this time travel mess is gonna get fixed up because it really is a mess right now. But I do love
Mm.
how everything's sort of coming together because now we're starting to really understand, and that's the thing, the way they're giving us this phase 4 and 5, they're feeding us little pieces of information, but they're not giving us everything. And I think people, the first thing they have to understand is that we might not be getting all of this in chronological order, meaning,
Yeah.
like we talked about, even though Loki season 2 is airing after Ant-Man and Quantum Mania takes place after. For all intents and purposes, we know that Doctor Strange and that Spider-Man take place before, or at least we
Hmm.
assume it's before Loki season 1, but
Mm.
maybe not. I actually don't even know
Yeah.
where they fit in. So there's a scene the big one is the mid credit scene where you see Immortus and Rama Tut and what's supposed to be the Scarlet Centurion, but he's blue, and and Immortus says they're beginning to touch the multiverse. I believe when he says they're beginning to touch the multiverse, that's literally when Doctor Strange did the spell in No Way Home. Because we're not supposed to mess with the multiverse, even though Kang's been messing with it forever and never, because it's time travel. So forever is literally forever.
Yeah, he
But
transcends the fourth dimension at that place at the end of time.
yeah, and also wherever the Kangs are at. Like I thought it was the same place, but it's not. Like it's interesting because people have to think about this really outside the box here. The Kangs may have been around since before Endgame, but because of time travel, even if we didn't see them around, they may have been there in the past because they can time travel. Like, so they might have been, in other words, the whole Kang story with He Who Remains, that may have been already a thing. Let's not forget that Renslayer, who I want to ask you about here in a minute, but she said in season one that the Avengers going back in time to get the stones was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm still wondering why. Either way,
Mm.
it does feel like He Who Remains has a plan. Now, in the last video we did, we talked about, and that's the one that got deleted. We talked about the real
It got
origin.
pruned.
Yeah, it got pruned. The real origin of Kang, which is the 31st century scientist Nathaniel Richards, whom we heard about
Yeah.
we heard briefly about him in season one, but reading the comics, he believes that he's a descendant of either Reed Richards or Doctor Doom. And I believe, my theory is that the 31st century Nathaniel Richards variant is Immortus. Even though we haven't been introduced to him yet, I think, because with the rumors now that the Fantastic Four movie is not going to be in 616, it's going to be in a different alternate New York. And I like that they're doing that. And that
Yeah.
we're going to eventually, that the Fantastic Four will come into the MCU with the Kang Dynasty and
Mm.
with the Secret Wars movies, and then probably stick around. But the idea is, I think Immortus is the original Kang because it makes sense with the comics. Immortus is the oldest one. However, I believe Kang the Conqueror, the one that was beaten by Ant-Man, that could also be He Who Remains. And it's kind of funny because you say,
Yeah.
oh, well, he's dead. That's not how Kang works, bro. He might be dead, but he's not really dead because there's tons of them. Now, one
Yeah, it's kind
thing.
of like the reverse Flash a little bit. Like you can kill him at one point in time, and then he'll find out that he got killed, and then he'll try and do things to change it.
Yeah, it's a very tough foe to beat. I did want to bring up also the line. If you watch Ant Man, because things are starting to make more sense. Ant Man, Kang tells Michelle Pfeiffer. He tells her that the multiverse is dying. He says that because his variants have messed around with time so much, which again, we haven't seen this on screen, but you have to understand time is relative, meaning the Kangs may have already gone back in time hundreds of times and made thousands of clones of himself, and we don't see it on screen because when's that happen? That's exactly the key. When time travel, there is no when because it's
Mm.
always happening. There's always something going on. So what I mean by that is when he says the multiverse is dying, to me, what we saw in episode 5 is what he's talking about. How we're seeing matter, like wood, everything turning
The
into spaghetti.
spaghettification.
Yeah, it feels like everything's falling apart because of the TVA and the loom and everything. It feels like all of that is tying together, and it feels like the Kang in that movie knew that because of what the Council of Kangs has been doing, the multiverse, like, yes, Kang may have been
Yeah.
killing trillions, but it's possible that even more trillions are going to die if these incursions continue.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like as they kind of like get into in Loki, where all of the people in the TVA are variants, you get into the idea that every single time they were pruning every single timeline, they were erasing trillions of people from existence. They were
Right.
doing something far worse than Thanos ever did. So
Yes.
that's kind of the reason why it's spiraled out like it is, because they don't want to kill them anymore. But the problem is the incursions will cause that to happen anyway, and so too will the Kangs, like the one Ant-Man. And we talked about this the last time, but basically it's possible that what's going to happen is that Kang, because he's said before he's tried like every variation and permutation of the timeline, where it's like, what if it happens this way? Will it be better? What if it happens this way?
Yeah, the
And that's where he
probability
came
thing.
upon yeah, and that's where he came upon eventually the idea of Loki and Sylvie taking over. But at that point, he sets up the next loop because they kill him. So it's possible that maybe because Loki is gaining the ability to actually actively like transfer himself throughout the time and everything with his time jumping, what could happen is that he'll be able to circumvent the loop and break it, and then the Kang who becomes He Who Remains gets killed in Ant-Man, which means that he no longer will be able to continue this loop, and thus in turn the other Kangs will have free reign to do whatever they want,
Right.
and things are going to be far worse than if they had just basically followed his advice at the end of Loki season 1.
That's the way. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking them beating Kang and Ant Man, and I mean, you could say killing, but we don't really know if he's dead. 'Cause there's obviously theories that he's getting sucked into the atom, not the quantum realm, like
Okay.
the subatomic realm, which is
Hmm.
below the quantum realm. But
Yeah.
that's just a theory. But the fact that they killed He Who Remains and the fact that they killed Kang means that the variants who are already out there, we saw them already, they can now invade 616, and that's what's going to end up leading to, because the whole thing, if you listen to what He Who Remains said, he said that not all of my variants are as benevolent as I am. Some felt that whenever there were new realms, there were new places to conquer. So clearly
Hmm.
Immortus, Ramatut, all these other variants, clearly they want to take over everything, and they want to conquer 616. But they're gonna have to beat the Avengers. But we know that Kang's already killed several Avengers because he says it in Ant-Man. Are you the one
Yeah.
with the hammer? Have I killed you before? Like, that's
Yeah.
just
And
good
then he gets
stuff,
beaten by
man.
ants.
Yeah, but I mean, the people have to understand that Thanos was dangerous, and physically Thanos is probably stronger than Kang. He's just a human being, but Kang has 31st century technology, and the fact that there's thousands of him, like we're
Yeah.
gonna literally see this huge CGI diarrhea Dookie show where we have
Yeah.
25,000 freaking
Iron Man's.
Jonathan Majors against, yeah, various Spider-Men and Iron Men and Captain
Here's a
Americas and
major question. Here's a major question.
crazy.
Are they going to have to multiply the amount of money they pay Robert Downey Jr. by the
I'm
amount of
sure he
variants
wants
that we
that.
see on screen?
I'm sure he wants that.
That's probably
But
why they're going to hire other people to play him, like Tom Cruise and other people. But then again, how much is Tom Cruise going to ask for?
right, well, maybe even more. And let's not forget that in the comics, Iron Lad, one of the
Oh
Iron
yeah.
Lads was a Kang variant. So I think we're going to
Mm,
see Kang variants on the good side as well. And that's exciting to me. But the big
yeah.
scuttlebutt that's come out, not just with the Variety article, because the Variety article talked about how if Majors is found guilty, they'll have to change plans. But that's nothing new.
Mm,
Nothing in that article surprised me. But they did talk about how the end of Loki season 2 is gonna 100% set up Kang as the villain. I mean, we already knew that, but
yeah.
what I'm thinking in my head is this upcoming episode is going to actually show us either the forming or the return of the Council of Kangs. So in other
Mm,
words, we're gonna see them come together, and then that's gonna lead into the mid-credit scene of Ant-Man. So it's before then. Now, I want to
yeah.
ask you about Renslayer. She got
Okay.
pruned. She should be at the end of time. And there's a scene in the trailer where you clearly see her, and it could be Eliath right in front of her, the universe eater. What is going to happen with her character? 'Cause she's probably going to be in the last episode.
Yeah, so I assume that she's not dead. As we know, you don't die when you get pruned in the story. You go to get devoured by a Goliath in that
Right.
world. And the thing is that I assume because she's the one who kind of led the forces and she's the one who helped Kang to win, he who remains at least, I assume that Goliath is probably going to obey her. Like maybe she'll like encounter him, be scared, and then he won't do anything to attack her. And then maybe
She can
she'll be
tame
like,
him.
wait a second. It's kind of like a John Connor with the Terminator moment. I have my own Terminator. In this case, I have my own universe eater. But then again, the other Lokis very well might still be there. At least some of them might still be alive. And so
Like the
as a
alligator.
result, maybe they're going to play a part in this. We're going to see where they are at this point.
Let me ask you a question, because okay, we know based on what He Who Remains said, there was already a multiversal war. In fact, there
Yeah.
may have been multiple multiversal wars, but
Hmm.
based on what he said, and then based on what Kang said in Ant-Man, does that mean that the first multiversal war, the one that already happened, that the Avengers were in that, but only other
Oh, yeah.
universes Avengers? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
almost implied like the Avengers and the superheroes have already been in one of these before.
Yeah, so what I think happened is there's basically been an almost infinite number of this happening. Like
It
Kang
feels
has like
like it.
yeah, and so basically the Avengers have probably fought him over and over and over again every single time they lose. Every single time everyone who fights him has lost. So he who remains has won over and over and over and over again, which is why he's so confident he's going to come back and win again because he's like I've already done this over and over again and this is just the next try, and then we'll see if this works. It's like a scientist experimenting with his own life, with the timeline. He's like, well, maybe next time I'll try something different, which leads me to think that somehow he is actually figured out a way to have information maybe stored in that location or maybe with missed minutes to where he will always learn from his last change or
Right.
mistake. And so he'll know because otherwise he wouldn't actually know any of this has happened, right? Like
Yeah, I remember he pulled out those
somehow,
pieces of paper and showed Loki and
yeah,
Sylvie. Like, he already knew they were coming. That's the thing. He who remains is he who knows all. And how
yeah.
do you beat something that already knows what you're going to do?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like the thing with Renslayer, to go back to that. I feel like Miss Minutes showing her that moment between her and Kang, he who remains, and then him wiping her memory was all intentional on the part of he who remains. Because at first they're like, oh, she's going to go against him and do her own thing. But I don't think so. I think that that is another part of the loop that he put into place. Like, I think basically every single thing we've seen thus far, he already anticipated and he
He said
included
it.
in his
He
plan.
said it himself. He said, I paved the road for you to get here. Which means
Yeah.
that even the time travel stuff is stuff that he already saw coming. But there has to be a way to beat him. I don't want to go
Yeah.
into, in this video, there is a leak about the basic plot of Secret Wars and of Kang Dynasty.
Hmm.
I don't want to go into that on this video, but it's interesting some of the ideas that are being tossed around if this is a true leak. But I do want
Yeah.
to discuss the fact that it has been pretty much confirmed that the TVA is going to be in Deadpool 3. Now,
Hmm.
that means that the TVA is not dead. That means that Loki will probably bring back the TVA in this next coming episode. I feel like what's probably going to happen is the TVA is going to be under Loki's control as opposed to He Who Remains. And what they're going to try to do is probably try to preserve some of these universes and try to stop the branching from happening or something. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do, but it feels like they're already kind of setting the stage for Loki Avenger Prime by having the TVA come back because they are going to come back. It's just, are they going to be doing the same thing?
Yeah. So a lot of this, I think we talked about this last time. A lot of this kind of feels like Marvel's version of
Crisis on Infinite
Crisis on
Earths.
Infinite Earths.
Yep.
Yeah. And so like the idea that everything's almost going to be reset where it goes to one world again and like the multiverse is resolved and
That's
we have
after Phase
X-Men.
6. Yeah.
Yeah, so with that, what if instead of like the evil Kang showing up at the end of this, like we're probably going to get some kind of big Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader in the hallway scene where just like somebody shows up at the end of the season. It's like, oh my God, it's like a mind-blowing thing.
Well, I'm
What if
thinking it's
like
going to be Kang. That's what I think.
what if we get a good Kang though? Kind of like, and
No, I
basically
think
he's like,
we will see one
yeah.
eventually. But what?
So,
Yeah.
like,
What's your idea?
like it would be an interesting subversion, I guess, like not in a bad Ryan Johnson way, but like if like Kang shows up and they're like, we gotta fight, and then it's like a good one, and he's like, I'm here to prepare you for the multiversal war, and then it's like a big like cliffhanger in that sense, like this is what's going to happen.
That's a
We
good
have to,
ending.
or like, another thing is too, again, we could have like a multiversal Robert Downey Jr. show up. I
I don't think they're
know
doing
that
that. At least not
I
yet.
doubt that they're going to do it in the show because it's such a big thing. But imagine if like Iron Man from another universe shows up, but then he could be the evil one from the comics that got like abducted when he was a kid by Kang and turned into like the evil version, kind of like they thought that was going to happen with Goku Black, where it was like a kid Goku that was abducted by Zamasu and raised to be evil.
That's
Shout
that
out to
that
our
that would
Dragon Ball
actually
channel.
be a better idea. Well, speaking of what you just said, that takes me to the Victor Timely thing because remember we talked about this earlier in the video about the time loop.
Yeah.
Victor Timely existing in the sacred timeline, separate from He Who Remains, is interesting to me because that means that somebody, it could even be He Who Remains, took Victor Timely from another branching timeline as a baby and put him in the sacred timeline because we assume, maybe
Hmm.
wrongly, that He Who Remains was born in the sacred timeline. He may not have been. Like I mentioned earlier, the 31st century Nathaniel Richards may have been from a different universe altogether, but obviously part of his backup plan, his contingency was to have a younger, like not knowing version of himself in the sacred timeline just in case he was killed, to have him continue the TVA by modifying the book that Ouroboros wrote slash read. Like, you know what I mean? He went
Yeah.
so far as to find like a child variant of himself and put himself in the sacred timeline just in case. And that's another mystery that has not been resolved yet. Do you think we'll get an answer to that in this coming episode?
I hope so. Like, I hope that they give us answers to all this because at this point, there are so many things that have been opened up. Going back to Star Wars, it's like the mystery boxes from JJ in episode 7 with Rey bypassing the compressor and all this other stuff that, like, she just so happened to be able to do and we thought was going to be explained. So I really hope that, like, what Loki says over and over throughout the season, where he's basically talking to the audience, like, don't worry, this will make sense later. I hope it actually does, because there was a little bit of that scene in the last episode with
They did it
Ouroboros
like three
talking to
times, I
Loki.
think, where he says that.
Yeah, and like there was that scene where Ouroboros was talking to Loki, and he's like, "You're doing these things, but they don't make any sense. They shouldn't be happening." So I kind of hope at the end of the season, like Loki doesn't just like look in the camera and be like, "It's okay, it doesn't have to make sense," and that's like how it wraps up. They don't even explain anything.
I
So
would hate that. I mean, I feel
yeah.
like what they're probably gonna do is, and this is my prediction, my official theory. Loki will figure out a way to save the TVA and stop the loom from exploding.
Mhm.
But, and this is where you and I put our time travel hats on because this is where things get convoluted. Because the loom already exploded. See, all right, I'm gonna try and explain it. You're probably gonna get it, Mike, but we also have an audience that's watching this, so follow me here. So the loom exploded. We saw that happen in episode 4. Even if Loki goes back in time to stop the loom from exploding, the loom already exploded. So if he goes back in
Mhm.
time to stop it, it'll create a branch timeline where he fixes the loom. The problem is that in one of the timelines, the loom exploded, and all it
Mhm.
took was that for the multiverse to shatter and for all these Kangs to pop up. So I feel like the consequences of this show are really going to be felt with not only Sylvie killing He Who Remains, but the loom blowing up. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Like, even though
Yeah.
it blew up, so no matter what, you can't do anything about it because the whole multiverse has already been exposed. All you're doing is making a
Yeah.
branching timeline where it doesn't blow up, but it already blew up. So you've already got a problem. Like, I know it's hard
Yeah.
for people to understand this. Like, am I explaining it right?
So there could very well, based upon what you're saying, be like multiple TVA timelines in a sense, one that got destroyed and one that did not.
Well,
And
we
the
saw
one that
two
got
Lokis,
destroyed,
so there has to be.
yeah, so in the one that got destroyed, that could mean that there's a multiverse where the Council of Kangs arises, which would be like separate from the other like multiverse where the TVA still exists. But the only thing I could
Yeah,
think
but
that might,
no. What I'm saying is, it's one big multiverse with branching
yeah,
timelines. So even if they fix the loom in timeline B, because timeline A already had the exploding loom, you've already got the multiversal crisis going on. You can't stop it. That's what
yeah,
I'm
that's
saying.
That's entirely possible that they'll explain that that's kind of how it works
What a
next episode.
mess.
Yeah, I know. Only other thing I could think of is that maybe with Loki's time slipping ability, what he has is that he actually can uh nullify that loop. And so basically because he can go back and rewrite the story as he's trying to
Yeah, he
say,
did say
maybe
that.
he has the ability to eliminate that loop and thus the loom never blows up and thus, kind of like Kang, his greatest power is his knowledge and creation of an infinite time loop that transcends like a multiverse. But it's like if Loki's greatest ability is to break loops and to like make it where they no longer happen, kind of which could lead to like the possibility of what we saw in Ant-Man where he gets exiled, then there's a chance that maybe he's able to like, this could be like the main weapon they could use basically to defeat the Council of Kangs, because whereas all of them screw with time and make loops, Loki's like, nah, get that loop out of here,
He would have to. He would have to. Yeah, he would have to get to that point. But and he
That
might.
kind of makes him the most powerful character in Marvel at this point, right?
I
Like
would assume
where he
it.
could basically transcend time. Like anytime you try and fight this guy, what are you gonna do? He could just go back in time, and beat you, no matter what you do. It's like trying to fight the Flash. You can go back in time when you're a baby and make it so he just pulls Don Cheadle on him. He's like,
Remember how it works though. If Loki, how Hulk explained, yeah, you're right. But if Loki goes back in time to, let's say, kill you as a baby, it's just gonna
yeah,
make a branching timeline. It's not gonna erase the future. They've tried to hammer that home that every time you go back in time and make a change, it creates a branching timeline. For example, in episode 3, when Renslayer left the book in Victor Timely's room, that was the sacred timeline. But when they went to the 1895, it was a branch timeline, which means that in one timeline, Victor
oh
Timely
right.
never got.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a very small detail. Victor Timely
Hmm.
never got the book in one timeline, but in the other
Okay.
timeline, he did. And they still brought him to the TVA. So I feel like even if Loki can go back in time and stop the loom from exploding, because the loom already exploded, and if the loom exploding represents the complete catastrophic, you know, out of control creation of multiverses that can no longer be controlled or whatever, if that's the case, then nothing can stop it now. It's already happened. It's done. But at the same time, no pun intended, just the idea. Think about how much of a mind fuck this is. Like I said, the casuals must be losing it. You create a machine that can squeeze timelines. Like, how do you even do something
Yeah.
like that? Like, that's, you know what I mean? Maybe I'm just not into physics as much as I should be. But how could a human being create a machine that could actually squeeze timelines and control them from
Yeah.
getting out of hand? Just that
I mean, we
idea is
gotta have
nuts.
a yeah, I guess I mean with a lot of shows and franchises and stuff like this, we have to have a lot of suspension of disbelief.
Right.
Like there's this Norse god with magical powers that always seems to forget how to use them when he comes to fighting normal people in this show. And then, at the same time we have like this one guy who somehow builds something larger than a timeline that can like hold temporal energy and extrude it in one line, and like we have to fix the temporal loom. It's kind of like Star Trek where they just make up a bunch of sciencey words and then they just like hope, and it's like a balloon but if you pop it or something, it has too
Right.
much air, and so that's something we should have gotten in this season, like just a character who just is like explain things the most like simple way possible. It's like we have to go back in
Ouroboros.
time. Yeah,
Ouroboros
but
did it.
Ouroboros, I guess he did, and I
It's like a
really liked
snake
him in
eating
this
its own
show.
tail. You
Yeah,
know?
he's kind of like my he might be my favorite character in the show right now. He's just really
Yeah, he
entertaining.
is my favorite of the new characters. He is. Short round from Indiana
Yeah.
Jones and the Temple of Doom. All right, well, before we close out, I am looking forward to this. Marvel's kind
Hmm.
of been trash for a little bit of time. Marvels is also coming out soon, and I'm going to
Oh
see this
boy.
above Marvels with plural. There's a lot of rumors about that, but low key, I'm excited for it, man. Low key still remains the best Disney Plus Marvel show. It's still the best
Oh
one.
yeah. Yeah, none of the shows really have come close as far as I'm concerned.
I
Even though
agree.
there are little issues here and there this season, like the relationship between Loki and Sylvie, I feel like needs to be a little bit more expanded because of what happened last season. But other than that, talk about a narcissist. The guy fell in love with himself. But the thing is, like, in terms of that, I'm looking forward to it. I hope it's good. If it ends up being great, really everything comes down to the follow through from the other stuff afterward. It could be an example of where like people are like, this was a great setup for like the ultimate villain, but then the other ones didn't carry it through. So we'll have to see. But I hope that they nail it next episode, and then I'll be doing a whole review of the season on my channel.
Yeah, I think this is an important episode because it has to give people hope that
Mm,
Kang the Conqueror will be a serious threat, and he is if you understand what he's doing.
yeah.
He might not be a Thanos as far as what Thanos did, but he's different, and I like that. And in some ways, in many ways, more dangerous because he has access to stuff that Thanos couldn't even mess with. And let's not forget, he's got the power to shut off Infinity Stones, as we saw in the TVA.
Yeah.
So just that right there is wild.
It'd be funny they
Anyways,
team up with Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet, and he like shows up like a badass. I'm gonna take you out,
and he
Kang. He's like, oh
snaps,
yeah,
and it does
and then he
nothing.
just like he just beats his ass.
Yeah, this is not your universe, buddy. It doesn't work. But I would love to see that. But we'll talk more about that as we approach the upcoming movie. So check out Mike and his various channels, and I appreciate you being here for the second time.
Yeah, no problemo.
All right, hopefully we get a good one this week. Take care,
Yep.
y'all. Leave a like. Good night or good day.